There's a kind of a new age idea of manifesting, but there's a core of truth in it, because the way your perceptual systems are set up is that once you specify a target, you preferentially attend to the world in a manner that makes the objects that exist in accordance with that target much more salient. That's how you navigate. You know, if you're going to walk from here to the next yard, what's going to stand out for you are the things you have to walk around, right? Because otherwise you won't get there. Well, everything is like that. Once you set a goal, as soon as you set a goal, the world lays itself out for you. Pathways forward, facilitators, and obstacles, and everything else that's irrelevant. Yeah. Right. That's how the perceptual and emotional systems work. So, and then you might say, well, how do they work if you have no goal? And the answer is, well, they're thrown into chaos. There's too many choices. There's no direction. You're anxious, and you're confused. Well, that's not a good way of propagating yourself along the pathway. You know, and with regards to the difficulty of the goal, there's rules for that too. If you have a child you love, and you give them a task, you want to set them up for success, which means they have some probability of attaining the goal compared to the effort exerted. The animal literature seems to indicate, for example, that if you pair animals together to play, the loser animal has to win a third of the time. So one of the things you could say is like a high-end goal for you might be one where you have a 65% chance of failing, right? So you don't want it to be a 99.9% chance of failing. I mean, there might be circumstances, there might be circumstances under which that really high-end goal is worth achieving if the payoff is massive, and you can break it up into sub-goals where the probability of victory is higher. But you want to play a fair game with yourself. And the game is, there's two games going on at the same time. One is, can you attain the goal? But the other is, can you expand your adaptive competence while you're attaining the goal? And that's why you don't want to just set a goal that for sure you can hit, right? Because if for sure you can hit it, it doesn't stretch you. And the goal is to stretch plus to climb.
And you don't want to set goals that, I mean, I said shoot high, but for instance, like my goal with exercise this year, because I got really sick last year and I haven't been exercising for a long time. And then I had a pregnancy, and my goal for exercising was twice a week for 15 minutes each time.
Right.
And it was like going from 0 to that would be a huge step in the right direction.
Oh, absolutely.
And then I have like after that 3 times a week for 30 minutes each session. So you don't shoot high, so you're not going to do it.
There's also a rule there too. So imagine that you decide twice a week for 15 minutes. And then it's a month and you didn't do it. So you don't say, oh, I'm an idiot and I'm a failure and this will never work. You say, well, how about once a week for 15 minutes? And then if that doesn't work, it's like, how about once a week for 10 minutes? Like, well, seriously, there's a rule. And the rule is aim at the goal. In case of failure, either discipline yourself because maybe there's some things you can sort out, or scale the goal back somewhat until you do it. This is humility. That's humility. Scale the goal back till you do it. That's humility, because that's actually taking yourself into account as you are. And that can be bitter, especially if you're trying to develop in an area where you're weak, because you may have to start very low.
Like exercise once a week for 10 minutes.
Well, I dealt with an old guy who was about 83 at one point, and he had a rough life, man. He had fallen off a ladder and broke his neck. And he was permanently fused in a very awkward and uncomfortable position. Right. And he was in chronic pain, and he was old and he couldn't do much. And so he kind of had it. He was laying in bed, depressed out of his mind. And he would have just, if MAID would have been available, he would have taken it in a second, like all depressed people, by the way. So what did we do for him? I think I started with, can you look at a magazine for 30 seconds?
Aww.
And then the next step was, can you sit up in bed? But by 2 weeks, we had him walking up and down the hallway. You know, like his life was never going to be stellar. But the reason I'm using him as an example is because I don't care how impaired you are. There's something that you could do that is a slight improvement over where you're at. And you might think, oh my God, it's so depressing to consider that I have to start that slow. It's like, fair enough. But this is where another fact of life comes into play. Progress tends not to be linear. It tends to be curvilinear, like this, almost exponential or geometric. And so you can start pretty damn minimally, and you'll speed up. If you're consistent, you'll speed up pretty rapidly. So you don't have to worry about having to start like a fool. This is why Jung said the fool is the precursor to the savior. You have to allow yourself to be the kind of idiot that you actually are to begin with. this is something you need to know when imagine you're trying to train your partner to do the dishes, regularly. Your goal might be they do the dishes immediately after dinner 7 nights a week, or maybe 3 because you do it half the time, whatever it happens to be. And they do a good job. Well, that's not necessarily where to start. Once badly would be a start. And that's a huge start because once is way more than 0.
Yeah.
Way more. And then you have to be patient and you have to allow the person, including yourself, to stumble forward stupidly a lot. So when I used to counsel my clients, for example, to go out on dates with their partners, they'd both just hate that idea. And then they'd go out and have a miserable time. And then they'd come back and trumpet triumphantly the misery of their date so that they never had to do that again. And it took a lot of talking to walk through. It's like if you're married, let's say you're married for 30 years and you could have 3 dates a week, 3 times of intimacy and close personal relationship a week. Let's say it's 3. That's not bad. 2 to 3 is probably about right. So let's say 3. So it's 100 years, 3,000 over 30 years. Well, if you have to do that stupidly 100 times as you're practicing, it's like it's only 100 over 3,000. It's nothing. It's a tiny fraction of the total. So you can stumble forward stupidly, and you need to allow your partner that luxury. You can teach them slowly, and you can reward progress as well as performance. Good thing to apply to yourself. So if you manage to exercise, once a week for 10 minutes, you give yourself a little pat on the, you don't have to go overboard. You're not queen of the universe.
Yeah. Look at me.
Yeah. Well, that could be a reasonable way of obtaining social support for it.
Yeah, we'll see. I think I can manage that. I hope I can manage that. I could really use some exercise.